You don't need me to tell you that perspective can be a tricky thing. But seeing the perspective in our own drawings objectively can also be a very tricky thing as well. We create a drawing line by line, minute by minute, maybe over hours, and any mistakes that creep into our work, we get used to seeing them in this time, so that by the end of the drawing, they look okay. We've become so used to seeing the mistakes in the time it took us to complete our drawing that the familiarity we now have with them means it's hard for us to see them. This exercise is designed to help us overcome this and give us the chance to see just how accurate our perspective is. Is this something we need to focus on in a certain way? Now, to do this exercise, what we need is a reference photo and a drawing that we've done of that reference photo. You might be able to use a drawing that you've already done if you've still got the reference for this. But for this exercise, I'll need to do a new drawing of this reference photo. So just give me 2 minutes and I'll draw it. And if you like, while you watch me draw, you can be comparing my perspective with the perspective of the reference photo and see what you think. So here I am doing a drawing that we're going to use for this exercise. So you can do a new drawing or you can use one you already have. This drawing took me 30 minutes to draw in real life. I deliberately chose a fairly brisk style because I didn't want to be labouring over the details. It's really the perspective which is the issue for this drawing. And while I didn't want the perspective to be perfect in this, I equally wanted to look as though I'd made some effort to make a reasonable drawing. So it was an interesting experience for me. I actually did a very rough block out of the building and put in the angles that I was going to use in this drawing so that I wasn't having to work out too hard what I was doing when I was actually drawing it. The way I draw these things now is so intuitive and so practiced that it's very hard to step outside of that framework and do it very differently. So we're just about done getting this tower done. How do you think it's looking? Just finish this front side, then we're done. Here we have it. So now I have my drawing and I have my reference photo. But just before I start, it might be a good idea if I take a photo of my drawing and I print off a copy. So let's go get a copy of it. Okay, I have my copy, so I'm ready to start the exercise. What I need is something that I can measure the perspective angles with. And while I usually use the pen I'm drawing with, for this exercise, it's best not to. Because what we're going to do is for every perspective angle, such as this one, we're going to... It's probably helpful just to tape our drawing in place. What we're going to do is to measure our perspective angles and then slide across and compare them with those in our drawing. So this angle should have been like this. This angle here should have been like that. This angle up here should have been like that. This angle here should have been like that. This angle here should have been going down slightly. This angle here. This angle here. Oh, that one's a fair bit off. This angle here. Oh, that one's even more off. This angle up the top here. Oh, that angle's very off. Let's just finish that tower, shall we? This angle here. Not as bad as the other side, is it? this angle here, this angle up here. What other angles have we got? Well, we've got ones over here. Got this one up here. This one here. Let's try this front wall here. So how do you find this? Did you spot all of these perspective angle errors as I drew? Or did you think it looked pretty okay to you? So in this particular drawing, the greatest errors are on the two sides that have the more extreme angles. And that's a common mistake. Either the angles are too extreme that I see, such as in these, where my drawing actually is at a steeper angle than the reference. Or more common, the lines are not angled enough, such as here and here. Now, eye level is about here. And the thing we know about perspective is that as angles move above eye level, they get steeper and steeper. Which means as we go higher and higher in a structure such as a tower, the angles at the top are very easy to not get at a steep enough angle, because it really is quite a steep angle we need to draw. You can see why I suggested that we get a copy of our drawing. So now I'm going to redraw this, but I have the advantage of knowing the sorts of perspective errors I'm going to make, whether I'm making some lines too steep and other lines too shallow, and whether as I go higher, I'm not increasing the angle enough. So being aware of the sorts of mistakes I'm going to make with the angles, it can help me to draw it more accurately. Let's have a go. Well, it's a bit of a relief now to get to draw this building without trying to make those deliberate mistakes. This is the Kelvingrove Museum and Gallery in Scotland, in the city of Glasgow, where we saw an amazing Rennie Mackintosh exhibition a few years ago. This is actually the rear section that overlooks a wonderful grassy area. So I'm drawing this in the normal style I'd use for a fairly quick, brisk freehand drawing. This drawing took a little bit longer than the previous one, about 40 minutes versus 30 minutes for that first one. I often measure the angles with my pen, particularly the upper and lower angles, and then I fill the in-between ones in freehand. I'm trying to keep to the same stylistic approach, including the same level of detail. The one thing I'm working harder at is to really make sure that my angles are correct. But having paid so much attention to it earlier to make sure they weren't correct, I think has made it a bit easier to get them more correct this time. Just finishing this rather grand back entrance. Added a few more details at the front just because I wanted to finish this one a bit more. Well, what do I think? I think the perspective angles on this second drawing are much more accurate. Although I was paying so much attention to those, I'm a bit annoyed that I got this tower leaning slightly to the right. Now let's see the difference if we compare the two drawings side by side. And this is where it's helpful if we still have our original, which doesn't have all the red lines on it. So what's the impact of working harder to get the perspective angles right? Here we have our two drawings side by side. On the left is the one with the less accurate perspective, and on the right, the one with the more accurate perspective. And the important question is, do we think it makes a difference to the overall look of our drawings? Did we think there was a problem with this drawing when we did it? Do we think there's that much difference between the two? Is it worth the trouble to take the extra care with the perspective angles? With this drawing, it's really only this line which, to my thinking, really jumps out as being in the wrong place. The other lines all look as though they could be okay. So the question is, what's the difference between drawing lines that look like they can be okay and drawing the angles that are actually there in life? And personally, I always feel that capturing the perspective angles, and particularly the steeper ones on some sides of our building and in the upper part of our drawing, really add to the sense of visual drama, really give a sense of our building, and often highlight the lines in a way that doesn't happen with a more flattened out approach. Can I really recommend that you do this exercise? You probably won't even have to do a special drawing for it, but just take a photo and print off a copy so you don't wreck your drawing. The other important thing with all this is, even if, with the exception of this line, this looks okay as a building, what we've just practiced is drawing a building not as accurately as we see it. And if we keep drawing buildings that aren't as accurate as we see them, then we'll get better and better at drawing buildings where the lines aren't quite right. Whereas if we make an effort every drawing to get every line and every angle in the right place as best we can, then we will get better at drawing buildings where the lines and particularly the perspective angles are in the right place. Because whatever we practice at, we get better. It's not just what we do, but it's how we do it and the result that method gives us. This is not a particularly easy reference for this exercise because it is a fairly complex structure, but I like the angles that it gave me to choose from. If you want to have a go with this, I'll put this reference photo on my YouTube community page and you can print off a copy to use it if you want to do a brand new drawing to do this. But can I really suggest that you do a drawing, print it off, and then really carefully check all those angles, and then have another go, and then compare the two drawings and just consider, is it worth the time and effort to really tighten up? I had a great deal of trouble drawing this because it has become second nature for me to draw my perspective angles fairly accurately. I've learned how to observe them, and even though I measure them, and I often measure the bottom and the top one, I've become used to drawing the perspective angles accurately. I've learned what to observe and the best method for any individual line to get it in the right place. And because I persevered with working hard to get them in the right place, I've got better at getting them in the right place. And now, as I said, the difficulty was to put them in the wrong place. So let me encourage you to give this a go. And instead of thinking, yes, that looks great, to actually measure our angles and see where they're not quite as great as we first thought. And of course, we're not doing this to discourage ourselves. We're doing this to point us in the right direction. We're doing this to increase our observation and to increase our attention and to know where to give our attention and how much effort we need to make in certain areas to do that. I hope you found this interesting and fun, and I really hope you enjoyed doing it yourself. And if you do it and make some interesting discoveries, then tell me in the comments, please. I would love to hear your experience of this exercise. I'm Stephen Travers. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.